The death of Odysseus's dog, Argus. So they spoke, and a dog, lying there, lifted his head and pricked up its ears. Argus was the hound of noble Odysseus, who had bred him himself, though he sailed to sacred Ilium before he could enjoy his company. Once the young man used to take the dog out after the wild goat, deer, and hare, but with his master gone, he lay neglected by the gate, among the heaps of mule and cattle dung that Odysseus's men would later use to manure the fields. There, plagued by ticks, lay Argus the hound. But suddenly, aware of Odysseus's presence, he wagged his tail and flattened his ears, though no longer strong enough to crawl into his master. Odysseus turned his face aside, and hiding it from Eumaeus, wiped a tear away, then quickly said, "Eumaeus, it's strange indeed to see this dog lying in the dung. He's finely built, but I can't tell if he had speed to match or was only a dog fed from the table, kept by his master for show." Then Eumaeus the swineherd replied, "Yes, this dog belongs to a man who has died far away. If he had the form and vigor he had when Odysseus left for Troy, you'd be amazed by the speed and power. He was keen-scented on the trail, and no creature he started in the depths of the densest woods escaped him. But now he's in a sad state, and his master has died far from his own country, and the thoughtless women neglect him. When their masters aren't there to command them, the servants don't care about the quality of their work. Far-voiced Zeus takes half the good out to them the day they become slaves." With this, he entered the stately house and walked straight into the hall, joined the crowd of noble suitors. As for Argus, seeing Odysseus again in his 20th year, the hand of dark death seized him. Odysseus among the suitors. Now, godlike Telemachus was the first to notice the swineherd as he entered the hall, and with a nod he called swiftly to his side. Eumaeus looked round and picked up a stool nearby, where the carver sat when slicing the joints of meat for the suitors at the feast. He took the stool and set it down at Telemachus' table, opposite him, then seated himself there. A steward brought him a portion of meat and helped him to bread from a basket. Odysseus entered close on Eumaeus' heels, in his beggar's disguise, looking old and wretched, leaning on his staff and clothed in miserable rags. He sat down on the ash wood sill of the doorway, leaning on the doorpost made of cypress that had been carefully planned true and line by the carpenters of old. Telemachus called the swineherd, and taking the whole loaf of bread from a fine basket, then, adding as much meat as his hands could hold, he said to them, saying, "Take this food, stranger, and tell him to do the round of the suitors one by one as well. It doesn't do for a man in need to be shy." At this, the swineherd went over to Odysseus as he spoke, and approached him with winged words, saying, "Stranger, this is from Telemachus, who suggests you do the rounds of the suitors one by one. He says that a man in need should not be shy." Resourceful Odysseus spoke in return, "Lord Zeus, I pray, grant that Telemachus may be blessed among men, and receive all that his heart desires." Then he took the food with both hands, and set it down in front of him on the shabby leather bag. While the minstrel sang in the hall, he ate, and he ended his meal as the bard was finishing his song, whereupon the suitors filled the hall with their noise. Now Athena appeared at Odysseus' side, close to that son of Laertes, and prompted him to go and gather scraps among the suitors and find out which were decent men and which were wild, not that she meant to save a single one of them from death. So round he went, starting on the right, proffering his hand on every side like a true beggar. They wondered who he was, and asked each other where he had come from, giving him food out of pity. Then up spoke Melanthius, the goatherd. "Queen, hear me on the subject of the stranger, since I've seen him before. The swineherd brought him here, though I don't know for sure what native country he claims." At this, Antinous rounded on the swineherd. "Eumaeus, the famous, why on earth did you drag this fellow here? Haven't we vagrants enough already? Beggarly nuisances to ruin our feasts? Isn't it enough for you that they all crowd in here, swallowing your master's stores without you inviting this wretch too?" "Eumaeus the swineherd, you answered him then, Antinous, noble as your words sound ill, who searches out foreigners himself and invites them home unless they are masters of some universal art, a seer or a physician or architect or perhaps a divine minstrel who delights in men with song. Such men are welcome throughout the boundless earth, but no one would invite a burdensome beggar. You are the harshest suitor where Odysseus' services are concerned, harshest of all to me. But I don't care, as long as loyal Penelope, my lady, and godlike Telemachus live here." But wise Telemachus spoke to him, "Silence now. Don't waste your words answering Antinous. It is ever his way to employ harsh language, and with trouble in mind stir men to anger, encouraging others to do the same." Antinous is angered. He added with winged words for Antinous himself, "Antinous, you show your concern for me indeed like a father for a son, advising me to drive the stranger by force of words from the palace. No, may the gods forbid such a thing. Give him some food yourself, since I don't begrudge it, but tell you to do it so, rather, paying no attention to my mother or any of the servants in Odysseus' palace. But you are minded quite differently, in truth, preferring to dine yourself rather than to give to another. Telemachus, Antinous retorted, brave spirit and noble orator, what are you saying? If every suitor gave him as much as I would, he'd avoid this house for a full 3 months. And with that, he snatched up a stool from under the table where it stood, the one he prompted his bright sandaled feet on during the feast, and flourished it. Nevertheless, all the others gave something, and Odysseus filled his leather pouch with scraps of bread and meat. Odysseus was heading back to the threshold, having sounded out the Achaeans scot-free, and when he paused near Antinous and spoke to him, "Give me something, friend, since you seem to me the best and not the least of the Achaeans here. You look every inch a king, and therefore it is right that you should give me a better portion than the others, and I will sound your name throughout the boundless earth. I, too, once had a house of my own among men. I, too, lived in riches in a fine palace, and often gave the gifts to strangers, whoever he might be, whatever his needs were. I had servants, too, without numbers, and an abundance of all that counts as wealth and allows a man to live as well. But Zeus, the son of Cronos, ended that. Such was his pleasure, when he prompted me to my ruin, sailing the long voyage to Egypt as a wandering corsair. There in the Nile I moored my curved ships. Then I told my loyal companions to stay and guard them while I sent out scouts to find the highest ground. But my crews, feeling confident and succumbing to temptation, set about plundering Egyptians' fine fields, carrying off women and children, killing the men till their cries reached the city. Hearing the shouting of the people poured out at dawn and filled the plain with infantry and chariots and the gleam of bronze. Zeus, who hurls lightning bolts, filled my men with abject fear, and not one had courage enough to face the enemy who threatened us on all sides or hold his ground. Then they killed many of us with their bronze weapons and dragged off the rest of the city as slaves. As for myself, they handed me over to their friend of theirs, son of Iasus, mighty ruler of Cyprus, where he took me, and from there I reached here in much distress." "What god is it," said Antinous, "who brings this creature here to blight our feast? Get away from my table, stand over there in the middle, you insolent and shameless beggar, lest you end up in a place more bitter than Egypt or Cyprus. Every man in turn you try will no doubt give to you without conscience or restraint, since there's never a thought of holding back when there's plenty at hand, and they're making free with another man's wealth." Resourceful Odysseus drew back and answered, "How's this? It seems your brains don't match your looks. If you can't bring yourself to break off a piece of bread when there's plenty here and give it to a suppliant at another man's table, is it likely that you would give even a grain of salt from your own?" At this, Antinous glowered, angered the more, and spoke with winged words and a dark look. "Now you're truly casting aspersions. I doubt you'll get out of this hall unscathed." Odysseus is struck on the shoulder. And with this he grasped a stool and threw it, striking Odysseus on his back under the right shoulder. But Odysseus stood firm as a rock and did not reel at the blow. He merely shook his head in silence, thinking dark thoughts in the depths of his mind. Then he returned to the threshold, sat down with his well-filled bag, and addressed the suitors. "Hear me, you suitors of the noble queen, while I say what my heart feels when a man is struck fighting for his own possessions, his cattle, or his white sheep. There's no reason for shame or grief, but Antinous' blow was on account of my ravening hunger, a curse plagued that brings men plenty of trouble. If there are gods and furies for even beggars, let Antinous find death before he can marry." Antinous, Eupeithes' son, retorted, "Stranger, sit quiet and eat, or go elsewhere, lest the young men drag you by hand or foot through the house and scrape off all of your skin." Such were his words, but the others were indignant, and one proud youth said, "Antinous, you were wrong to strike at the wretched vagrant. What if he chanced to be some god from heaven? You'd be a doomed man. The gods put on all kinds of disguises, and in the form of wandering strangers do indeed visit our cities, observing human virtue and vice." So the suitors murmured, but Antinous ignored their words, and though Telemachus nursed great grief in his heart at the blow to his father, he shed not a tear, but shook his head in silence, thinking dark thoughts in the depths of his mind. But wise Penelope, hearing of Antinous' striking the beggar in the hall, cried out so her handmaids heard, "I hope Apollo the keen archer strikes you in the same way." And her housekeeper, Eurynome, added, "If only our prayers might be fulfilled, not one of these men would see the dawn, gold throne." "Nurse," wise Penelope replied, "they are all hateful, plotting evil, but Antinous above all is a man as dark as death. See now, when a wretched beggar goes through the hall asking alms out of need while the rest fill his bags generously, Antinous hurls a stool back at him and strikes him on the shoulder." Penelope summons the stranger. While she sat in her room talking with her maids, noble Odysseus was eating his meal. Penelope then summoned her loyal swineherd and said to him, "Worthy Eumaeus, go and ask the stranger to come to me so I can welcome him and ask him if he has seen or heard anything of my steadfast Odysseus. He has the look of a much-traveled man." Eumaeus the swineherd, answered her, saying, "My queen, I only wish the Achaeans would cease their noise, since his speech is entrancing. He stumbled upon me at first after he'd escaped from a ship by stealth. 3 days and nights he stayed with me in the hut, but even then the story of his sufferings was incomplete. Sitting in my house, he held me entranced like a man gazing at a bard who sings songs of longing the gods have taught him to mortal ears. He claims he's an old family friend of Odysseus, and hails from Crete, where Minos' people live. He's arrived here wandering far from that island, always dogged by suffering, and he swears that he's heard news of Odysseus, that he is alive and nearby in the rich Thesprotan country, and bringing home a fortune in treasure. Summon him here," said wise Penelope, "so he can tell me face to face. As for those suitors, let them have their sport outside or in the hall, light-hearted because their own stores of bread and mellow wine are safe at home with only their servants to taste them, while they crowd our house day after day, killing our sheep and oxen and well-fed goats, feasting and wasting our glowing wine, squandering our wealth because there's no Odysseus here to stave off ruin. But if Odysseus comes home to his own country, he and our son will take revenge on these men for their rapacity." As she finished, Telemachus sneezed loudly in the echoing hall, and Penelope laughed and said to Eumaeus with winged words, "Go, please, and summon the stranger to me. You see my son sneezed at my words. So will death strike at the suitors, every man, not one will escape their fate. And remembering this, that I say well, if I find he that speaks the truth, I will fit him out in handsome clothes, a tunic, and a cloak." Odysseus declines to see Penelope. Hearing this promise, the swineherd went to find Odysseus and spoke aloud to him with winged words, "Old man, wise Penelope, the mother of Telemachus, wishes to see you. Sorrowful as she is, her heart prompts her to ask for news of her husband. If she finds that you speak the truth, she will give you what you need most, a tunic and a cloak, since for food you can beg throughout the island to feed your belly, and anyone will give it to you." Noble long-suffering Odysseus answered, "Eumaeus, I will tell the whole truth to wise Penelope, Icarius' daughter, shortly. I know all about Odysseus, he and I have suffered alike, but I fear this harsh crowd of suitors whose violence and irreverence reaches the adamantine heavens. Just now, when the man struck me a blow and hurt me as I wandered harmlessly round the hall, no one, including Telemachus, did a thing to prevent it. So ask Penelope, even though she is eager to see me, to wait until sunset darkens the hall. Then she can give me a seat near the fire and ask about her husband and his homecoming, for my clothes are ragged, as you know, you who at first asked for help." Hearing this, the swineherd returned as he entered the room. Penelope said, "Eumaeus, you fail to bring him here. What does the stranger mean by it? Is he more afraid than he should be of something, or does he hesitate for some other reason? A shy beggar makes a poor one." Eumaeus the swineherd, you answered her then, saying, "He is right, anyone would agree, in wanting to avoid the insolence of arrogant men, so he asks you to wait until sunset, which is a more fitting time for you, my queen, to speak to a stranger alone, and to hear what he has to say." Wise Penelope answered, "The stranger is not devoid of judgment in guessing how things might be, since I don't believe there are any men on earth who plot such wicked and insolent games as these men do." When she had finished speaking, and he had said all he had to, the worthy swineherd left to rejoin the crowd of suitors. At once he saw Telemachus, and holding his head, close whispered winged words to him in secret. "Dear master, I will go and protect the farm and the pigs, your livelihood and mine. You must be in command here. Above all, consider your own safety. Be alert for any threat against you, since many of the Achaeans are planning evil, and may Zeus destroy them before he could strike at us." "May it be so, old friend. Have your supper and go. Return in the morning with some fine animal for the slaughter. Leave it all here in my hands and the gods." At this, the swineherd seated himself again on the gleaming bench, and when he had quenched his hunger and thirst, he went off to the farm, leaving the courts and the halls with the revelers, who were enjoying the dancing and singing now that evening had fallen.